In that cold room, where every bright light seemed to increase the weight of the pain, the silence was interrupted only by the sounds of the machines. The body stretched out on the stretcher, motionless, was the only thing that seemed to unite two women, separated by a deep abyss. One wore mourning in silence, even though she hadn't lost anyone. The other displayed the arrogance of someone who believed she had won, even without knowing what was truly at stake. Doctors came and went with restrained expressions, trying to hide the fact that behind their professional coldness lay a tension that could no longer be ignored. Moments before, in the same hallway where lives intersect and hearts break, she was humiliated before everyone. Cutting words, spoken with pleasure, pierced her chest like blades. The look of contempt, the tone of derision, the cruel accusation that she was nothing more than a nuisance. All of it echoed within her as she watched the man she loved hover between life and death. You could have turned your back, you could have let fate do its work, but you chose silence, you chose action, you chose to save. While the other cried before the doctors, feigning despair, she remained firm, but broken inside, knowing her gesture would never be recognized. No one there would know that it was her silent decision that secured the minutes he needed. No one would know that, even after everything, she still chose to care. And the moment his eyes moved for the first time, still not understanding what had happened, the question that remained in the air was not about who was by his side at that moment, but rather, will he one day discover who really saved his life? If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and leave your like so you don't miss the next chapters that deserve to be told. Before that stormy night, when fate placed everyone under the cold lights of the hospital, there was a story of perfect appearances that deceived even the most attentive eyes. Kang Ji-hoon and Lee Hye-rim, for years, they were the ideal couple of Seoul's high society. He, a young businessman who had inherited a family conglomerate and expanded it with talent and boldness, was considered a symbol of success. She, a woman of humble origins, but with a pure heart and unwavering dedication, had become the image of silent support, the one no one saw shine, but who sustained his brilliance. Hye-rim woke before sunrise to prepare every detail of the house, reviewing meeting schedules, reminding people of appointments, and caring for her husband's health. Even without holding a formal position in the company, she was the one who calmed crises, discreetly advised, and smoothed over flaws that could tarnish Ji-hoon's image. While he gave speeches at lavish dinners or smiled for reporters' cameras, she remained by his side, discreet yet essential. Many admired her silently, but few realized how much of herself she sacrificed to keep the gears running smoothly. The relationship, however, had never been balanced. Ji-hoon, in his thirst for power and recognition, treated his wife's dedication as an obligation, not as love. The weight of his arrogance increased with each conquest, and his former sensitivity transformed into calculated coldness. For him, marriage was more a pillar of his public image than a true bond. Still, Hye-rim endured. She knew the business world was cruel, and she believed that silence and patience would one day be rewarded. It was in this scenario that it emerged Han Soo-jin, initially a junior employee in a marketing department, but skilled at using charm and cunning to rise. Her lingering glances, measured words, and ability to position herself as a confidant gradually began to undermine the CEO's barriers. Ji-hoon, vain and eager to feel forever young and invincible, surrendered to the games of seduction. What began as secret encounters soon turned into public appearances until the secret was no longer a secret. Society whispered in the hallways of events, the press recorded knowing glances, and Hye-rim, no matter how hard she tried to hold her ground, already felt her position becoming untenable. The parties that had previously been hosted by her were now hosted by Soo-jin, and the seats next to her husband, once reserved for her, were now occupied by his mistress. The final blow came at a business meeting when, in front of foreign investors, Ji-hoon introduced Soo-jin as part of his new life, relegating Hee-rim to an awkward silence. The divorce was signed without resistance. There was nothing left to protect. Hee-rim left without asking for anything, without demanding half of the fortune, without claiming any rights. She only took with her the memories of a love that had been shattered and the dignity that no one could take away. However, even though she was separated, her soul still burned. Not from the desire for revenge, but from the open wound of being erased as if she had never existed. And that's why, that night she rushed to the hospital. She didn't do it as an ex-wife, nor as someone seeking recognition. She ran because despite everything, there was still a flame inside her that refused to be extinguished. A flame that I couldn't tell if it was love, compassion, or simply a remnant of everything they'd been through. However, what Hee-rim didn't know was that her reunion with Soo-jin wouldn't be just another passing humiliation. That night would be marked by revelations capable of reversing roles, reopening wounds, and exposing secrets kept hidden. Because when a lover crosses the line into absolute contempt, the fall that follows can be even more devastating. The hospital's bright corridors not only reflected the metallic glow of the lamps, but also served as a stage for the vanity of Han Soo-jin. With each step she took, her heels echoed like declarations of possession, and her haughty gaze betrayed the confidence of someone who believed she had conquered not just a man, but the entire space around him. Upon reaching the reception desk, she lifted her chin and announced her presence as if she were the legitimate lady of the family, demanding privileges, treating doctors and nurses with an air of authority that didn't belong to her. The team, embarrassed, obeyed. It wasn't uncommon for lovers to assume positions of power in times of crisis, but the way Soo-jin asserted herself was cruel, as her sovereignty seemed to exist only to demean Hee-rim. When the ex-wife tried to approach discreetly, wanting at least a glimpse of the man she had once called husband, Soo-jin stood between her like an insurmountable wall. With a cold smile, she said loudly, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "You no longer have a place here. The CEO is in my care now." The words were sharper than any scalpel. Doctors exchanged awkward glances, some recognizing Hee-rim, remembering the times she had accompanied her husband discreetly and sweetly. But no one dared intervene. Soo-jin had transformed the room into a silent arena where only her voice dominated. Hee-rim, her dignity wounded, remained silent, knowing that any reaction would be interpreted as weakness. The mistress, pleased with the scene, made a point of displaying even greater power. She pulled documents from her purse, signed the papers as responsible companion, and before handing them over to the doctor, cast a look filled with contempt at the woman who watched in silence. It was as if she was saying without words, "I won and you lost." The humiliation didn't end there. Soo-jin approached Hee-rim as if she wanted not just to knock her down, but to trample on the remains of her opponent's pride. In a soft, almost sweet, yet venomous voice, she murmured, "It must be painful to watch from the outside. If I were you, I wouldn't be able to bear it." For a moment, Hee-rim considered responding, letting years of pain explode, but she restrained herself. Her teary eyes drifted to the emergency room doors closing before Ji-hoon. Deep down, she knew there was still something inside her that wouldn't allow her to simply turn away. Something that held her back, even after so many wounds. Soo-jin, noticing her rival's silence, believed she had achieved the ultimate victory. She turned to the doctors and ordered them to ensure complete restriction of access. And so, in front of everyone, Hee-rim was treated like an intruder in a place where she had once been. indispensable. The weight of the scene lay not only in the lover's arrogant gesture, but in the fact that no one dared defend his former wife. It was as if everyone there had forgotten who had supported Ji-hoon for years. The collective oblivion hurt as much as the outright rejection. But fate, merciless in its ironies, doesn't allow arrogance to last long. And although Hee-rim remained silent, there was something in the air, almost invisible, that announced that the night still held surprises. After all, when humiliation reaches its limit, it's precisely at that point that the twists and turns begin to unfold. The clock at reception ticked away every second as if it were a hammer striking down on one's dignity. Lee Hye-rim. She remained motionless, her hands clasped in front of her, trying to hide the tremor that consumed her insides. The hospital, which should have been a place of care and compassion, had been transformed into a stage for a cruel spectacle where all eyes were on the forgotten ex-wife, reduced to an uncomfortable figure who didn't deserve to be there. It was in this scenario that Han Soo-jin decided to deliver the final blow. With firm steps, she approached the secretary in charge of the department and requested access authorization for companions. The paper was still fresh with ink when Soo-jin took it in her hands, signing with large, sharp letters as if each stroke were a victory sign. Then she looked at Hye-rim, held the document up in front of her, and shamelessly tore it into pieces that slowly fell to the polished white floor. The sound of the paper crumbling echoed like thunder in Hye-rim's mind. It wasn't just a shred of paper destroyed, but the symbol of her definitive exclusion. That gesture told the world that she no longer had room to even witness the fragility of the man with whom she had shared so many years of her life. The people around her gasped in shock. Some averted their eyes, unable to bear such cruelty, but no one dared speak. Hye-rim felt her legs wobble, but she remained upright. If she allowed herself to fall, she would give her rival the satisfaction of seeing her crumble in front of everyone. Her silence became a shield, however fragile, against Soo-jin's ferocious attack. But inside, a whirlwind of memories tore her apart. Cold nights waiting for her husband to return, the weight of loneliness in a huge, silent house, the disdainful looks at social events when he no longer hid the presence of his lover. Everything seemed to repeat itself, condensed into that scene of public humiliation. Soo-jin, satisfied with the effect of the gesture, leaned a little closer to Hye-rim and whispered, so that only she could hear, "You should learn to accept your place. The world has already forgotten you." The words sank deep, but they didn't produce the expected reaction. Hye-rim took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she maintained the same serene expression, even though her teary eyes revealed the silent battle raging within her. Soo-jin recoiled, irritated that she couldn't coax a look of despair from her. However, the real wound lay not in the lover's arrogant gesture, but in the collective indifference. Those who knew the story, who remembered the times Hye-rim had accompanied Ji-hoon through crucial moments, now remained silent as if she were some stranger. The weight of oblivion was almost unbearable, as if the past had been erased in a single breath. Yet, even amidst the pain, there was something in Hye-rim's posture that betrayed an invisible strength. It was as if, behind the humiliation, there was a spark that refused to die. A flame that, though small, remained alive and waiting for the right moment to light up again. And it was precisely this silent flame that night set the stage for an unexpected revelation. Because just when everyone believed Hye-rim had been defeated forever, fate, merciless and ironic, was already plotting the next step in a story no one dared predict. After the torn pieces of paper hit the hospital floor, Lee Hye-rim, she walked slowly to a corner of the hallway, as if trying to disappear into the white shadows of the cold walls. Her body remained erect, but inside she felt every part of her shattered. as if every shred of her dignity had been ripped away before the silent judgment of her eyes. She rested her hands on the metal seat of a waiting chair and took a deep breath, but her breath came in. Ragged gasps, revealing the effort she was making to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. At that moment, the past came rushing back like a relentless torrent. He remembered the first time he held Ji-hoon's hand when they were still young, full of dreams and promises of eternity. He remembered the days when he would wake before sunrise to prepare every detail of his husband's life, believing his silent efforts would be reciprocated with love. There were also the long nights when he would wait for the door to open, and instead of finding the welcoming gaze of a companion, he would be met with the coldness of a man who grew increasingly distant. The weight of these memories crushed her, as if she were reliving every pain in a single moment. The tears previously held back began to flow slowly, wetting the face she had always tried to keep firm before the world. Hai-rim wept not only for the humiliation of that night, but for all the times she had withdrawn, believing that silence was a virtue, that patience was enough to keep a marriage alive. The loneliness of having loved alone for years made her feel small, as if she had been reduced to nothing before the triumph of another woman. She closed her eyes and for a moment wished she could disappear. She wanted the pain to be brief, for no one to see her in that vulnerable state. Yet within that same emptiness, a raw power still pulsed. An inner voice whispered that her story wouldn't end there, that there was more to life than the shadow of the man who had scorned her. The minutes passed slowly, as if time refused to move forward. People came and went in the hallways, but Hai-rim seemed invisible. That invisibility was cruel, but also liberating, because it allowed her to look inside herself without masks, without having to uphold the image of the perfect wife she had always been required to hold. In that deepening of herself, she realized that, although she had lost almost everything, she still possessed something that neither Soo-jin, nor Ji-hoon, nor society could take away: the ability to start over. And it was precisely at the lowest point of her grief that this silent flame began to shine, almost imperceptibly, but enough to remind her that she was not completely defeated. It was as if life, in its cruelty, also offered her a breath of hope hidden among the tears. However, Hai-rim didn't yet know that this breath would soon become a storm, because while she retreated into silence, believing her presence there was only cause for shame, a medical revelation was approaching, ready to turn everyone's night upside down. Fate, relentless and ironic, was about to place her back at the center of history, not as a humiliated spectator, but as a key player in a game no one could have imagined. When the divorce was signed and the front door closed behind her for the last time, Hai-rim, she disappeared as if dissolved in the cold Seoul wind. Many believed she had fled to escape shame. Others said she had gone mad. The truth, however, was that she chose silence as her path, not out of weakness, but as a way to rebuild herself away from the eyes that judged her. Far from the city, he found refuge in forgotten villages where the glitter of skyscrapers couldn't reach. There, among simple hospitals and corridors filled with children, he rediscovered his calling. If before he had dedicated his life to supporting an arrogant man, now he dedicated himself to saving anonymous lives, caring for people who had nothing but hope. It was in these places that he learned to smile again, even if it was a discreet smile, full of scars, but genuine. In the years that followed, she became respected among doctors and volunteers. She didn't seek applause, she didn't make headlines, but each patient she cured was a personal victory, a silent proof that her life still had meaning. With each scalpel she held, with each life she saved, she strengthened a piece of herself that had been crushed by Ji-hoon's indifference and Soo-jin's contempt. Despite her new conquests, Hye-rim didn't talk about the past. She avoided mentioning her ex-husband's name, didn't keep photos, didn't carry any mementos. To those who knew her in this new era, she was simply the doctor with steady hands and a compassionate heart, a woman who had chosen discretion as her way of life. However, behind her serene expression, there was a part of her that never faded, a discreet, almost invisible flame that still connected her to the man she once loved, not out of current love, but because of the weight of the story they had written together. Her silence wasn't just oblivion, it was preparation. Unbeknownst to anyone, life was shaping her for an inevitable reunion, a clash of fates that would bring her face to face with what she'd tried to leave behind. And although Hye-rim believed she'd never cross paths with Ji-hoon again, fate was already drawing invisible lines that would lead her to him. Again, because on a night marked by siren lights and cold orders inside a luxurious hospital, it would be precisely this silent past, kept as a secret, that would reveal to the world who really had the power to decide between the life and death of the man who had so despised her. While Hye-rim silently relived the ghosts of his past, on the other side of the glass doors of the emergency room, the situation of Kang Ji-hoon, his condition worsened by the minute. Monitors flashed red, alarms sounded at short intervals, and doctors scurried around the gurney, trying to contain his sudden collapse. The man who had always prided himself on commanding conference rooms and commanding respect in any setting was now nothing more than a vulnerable body, dependent on the skill of others for survival. Outside, Han Soo-jin, she paced back and forth, anxious, but not for Ji-hoon's life, but for the fear of losing the position she had earned by his side. Her nails scratched the designer bag she carried as if she could control fate by the force of her own vanity alone. Every doctor who left the room was accosted with questions, demands, even veiled threats. Still, no answer was comforting. The news came as a cold sentence. Ji-hoon needed an immediate transplant. His heart wouldn't last much longer without intervention. The silence that fell was heavy and cruel, as if every second was stealing everyone's hope. Soo-jin's eyes widened, almost in disbelief. She asked about donors, the compatibility list, any alternative that wouldn't require the presence of the one she feared most. The doctors, however, were blunt. There was no donor available, no registered option that could save the CEO's life. At that moment, the name of Hye-rim came like an uncomfortable whisper. Some doctors recognized her, remembered the old tests, knew her compatibility was unique. Soo-jin felt her body freeze as if she'd been struck in the full light of the hospital. She, who had dedicated herself to erasing any trace of her ex-wife, now found herself faced with the possibility of depending on her. Hye-rim, still standing in the hallway, was discreetly called. The doctors respectfully explained the situation. A shock coursed through her body like an electric current. She couldn't believe that after so much pain, fate had placed her in this exact position, the only one capable of deciding whether Ji-hoon would live or not. Her eyes were lost in space for a few seconds, trying to process the weight of the revelation. On the other side, Soo-jin tried to intervene, demanding that they seek alternatives, that they call international hospitals, that they not place Ji-hoon's fate in the hands of a woman who was no longer part of his life. But the medicine was clear, relentless, and there was no time to waste. Ji-hoon's body was failing, and any delay meant no turning back. Hye-rim felt her heart tighten. All the memories came flooding back, the arrogance, the betrayals, the tears, hidden in cold pillows. But behind the open wound, there was also the memory of a love that had once existed, the promise of youth, the life they had built together. It was impossible to simply ignore what history had etched into her soul. The decision wasn't spoken aloud, but it was evident in her teary eyes. She accepted, not because she wanted to save Ji-hoon, but because inside her there was something greater than anger, something that blended between compassion, humanity, and perhaps a final, silent goodbye. As she walked toward the surgical ward, the sound of Hye-rim's footsteps echoed like a prelude to something grand. Every glance that followed her seemed to understand that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Fate, in all its irony, had just reversed the roles. And while Soo-jin burned in despair, unable to control the inevitable, Hye-rim prepared to walk through the door that would bring her face to face with the man who had destroyed her, but who now depended entirely on her to keep breathing. The doors to the surgical ward slowly opened, revealing Lee Hye-rim wearing a blue uniform that contrasted with the pallor of her serene face. Her hair was tied in a tight bun, and the surgical mask covered half of her expression, but her eyes betrayed the mixture of fear and courage she carried. Around her, the medical team briefly paused, as if recognizing in that instant the symbolic weight of her presence. Outside, Han Soo-jin couldn't contain his scream. His shrill voice echoed through the corridors, filled with despair and disbelief. "You can't allow this. I won't accept her touching him." The doctors, however, did not move. There was no other choice, and everyone knew it. The life of Kang Ji-hoon depended solely on the woman her lover so despised. Soo-jin, overcome with rage, tried to approach the door, but was restrained by security guards. The furious look she gave Hye-rim pierced the glass like a knife, but her ex-wife didn't look away. She simply walked forward, her steps firm, like someone who had already made her choice and wouldn't turn back. Inside the room, the atmosphere was tense. Ji-hoon remained unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped rapidly. His skin, once tanned by the luxury of travel and the spotlight, now looked lifeless, reminding everyone that no power could overcome human frailty. When Hye-rim approached, a reverent silence fell over the room. She looked at that face she knew so well, remembering the times she had smiled beside him, but also the tears she had shed because of him. He held his ex-husband's limp hand for a moment. The cold touch brought forth an avalanche of mixed feelings. There was no longer love, but there was something greater, a quiet compassion, a sense of humanity that refused to let him die, even after everything. Taking a deep breath, he nodded to the doctors and prepared for the procedure. Meanwhile, outside, Soo-jin paced like a caged beast. With each passing second, her anxiety grew. What she feared most was not only losing Ji-hoon, but seeing his bond with Hye-rim rekindled in a way she could never control. The mere fact that her ex-wife was the one to save her life was, in itself, an unbearable defeat. The procedure began. The surgical lights came on at full intensity, illuminating the scene as if it were a silent courtroom where fate was being judged. Hye-rim closed her eyes for a moment, muttered something to herself, and let the doctors continue. With each irregular tick of the monitor, it felt as if time stretched on invisible strings, keeping everyone in absolute suspense. However, that reunion wasn't limited to the physical contact of the transplant. It was a clash of worlds. On one side, the woman who had been humiliated, erased, and forgotten. On the other, the man who, even unconscious, depended completely on her. And all around, the team's gazes carried the understanding that they were facing an irreversible moment, one that would forever mark the lives of all three involved. And when the scalpel finally cut through the silence of the room, a feeling spread. Nothing would be the same after this procedure. Because the moment Ji-hoon woke up, the weight of the revelation would fall upon him like a burden impossible to ignore. The early morning hours were approaching when the first signs of stability appeared on the monitors. The heavy silence of the operating room was replaced by the doctor's restrained relief. Kang Ji-hoon, which oscillated between life and death, now pulsed again, sustained by the silent sacrifice of Lee Hye-rim. Exhausted and pale, she remained motionless for a few moments after the procedure, watching from afar the man who had once occupied every space in her life. There was no triumph in her eyes, only profound weariness and the certainty that she had fulfilled what destiny had demanded. When Ji-hoon finally opened his eyes, the soft morning light streamed through the blinds of the recovery room. His body felt heavy, his mind fuzzy, and it took him a few seconds to realize where he was. Shifting his gaze, he found Hye-rim's silhouette sitting in a nearby armchair, her expression serene yet distant. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but reality hit him hard. She had returned, and it was thanks to her that he was breathing again. "Why? Why did you do that?" His voice was weak, almost a whisper, thick with disbelief. Hye-rim remained silent. Her eyes rested on him for a moment, but there was no anger, no tenderness, only the neutrality of someone who no longer expects anything. Her silence was more cutting than any words. Ji-hoon insisted, tears welling up in his eyes. "I was wrong. I was blind. I was proud. But you still care about me, don't you?" The weight of the plea fell on Hye-rim like an iron chain. Once, those words would have melted her heart. Today, they were only the belated echoes of a regret that couldn't repair years of pain. She stood, slowly walked to the window and let the silence answer for her. The distant sound of the hospital filled the void between them, and Ji-hoon felt more fragile than ever. He tried to stand, his hand trembling as he reached out to her, but Hye-rim didn't turn her face. Her eyes stared at the grey Seoul skyline, as if searching for a way out of the past that was finally saying goodbye. In that room, the man who had always believed himself in control begged for a chance, while the woman he had, humiliated so many times, discovered the power of silence as an answer. And though she hadn't said a single word, Ji-hoon understood that the distance between them was now insurmountable. But what he didn't yet know was that the lack of forgiveness wouldn't be the only punishment. True justice was yet to come, and when it did, no amount of pleading would reverse the inevitable. In the days following the surgery, the recovery room became a stage for an invisible tension. Kang Ji-hoon watched every movement of Lee Hye-rim like someone searching for crumbs of hope in a barren desert. He believed that the simple fact that she had given part of herself to save him was a sign that there was still a chance to rebuild something. He tried to call out to her, begging for moments of attention, but always received the same silent response. A distant look that betrayed neither hatred nor love, only indifference. Hye-rim didn't avoid him out of cruelty, but because she had overcome the need to prove anything. The revenge she had chosen was more devastating than sharp words or scandalous confrontations. It was contempt. With every plea from Ji-hoon, every tear he shed, her firm stance demonstrated there was no room for return. The woman he had humiliated in the past was now the very one sustaining his life, and this irony sounded like an irrevocable sentence. Soo-jin, for her part, watched the downfall from afar. Her confidence crumbled as she realized that, although Ji-hoon tried to cling to Hye-rim, it was precisely her ex-wife's silence that made her unattainable. Her lover, accustomed to winning through scandal, didn't know how to deal with the cutting serenity of someone who didn't need to prove anything. In the hallways, doctors and staff began to look at Hye-rim with respect, as if they recognized her true strength. And this silent admiration was Soo-jin's greatest defeat. The climax came when, in front of everyone, Ji-hoon held Hye-rim's hand and begged, "I can't imagine going on without you. Give me one more chance." She removed her hand slowly, not violently, just firmly. Her eyes met his, and with the calm of someone who no longer carries a weight, she responded simply by standing and walking toward the door. There was no shout, no dramatic scene, just the cold realization that her absence would be more painful than any word of refusal. In that moment, Ji-hoon felt absolute defeat. It wasn't the company's bankruptcy or the loss of status that destroyed him, but the certainty that the love he'd scorned could never be regained. Justice was being served in the quietest way possible, through the indifference of those who no longer belong to the past. But ruin rarely comes all at once. And as Hyrim left the room without looking back, an unbearable emptiness began to grow in the CEO's heart. He didn't know it yet, but the true weight of his choices was only just beginning to sink in. The room was now plunged into silence. Only the rhythmic sound of the appliances reminded Kang Ji-hoon that he was still breathing. The armchair where Lee Hee-rim, the place he had sat, remained empty, and that absence became an unbearable weight, greater than any physical pain he could feel. For the first time in many years, he was not the center of attention, not the man admired or feared, but simply a broken human being, facing the void left by his own choices. Flashes of memory came like blades, slicing through his mind. He remembered the times he'd ignored his wife's silent efforts, the looks of contempt he'd given her when she'd simply sought a gesture of affection. He recalled her arrogance at social events, the way he'd paraded Soo Jin around like a trophy, oblivious to the fact that her every smile was an open wound in Hyrim's eyes. Now alone, each of these memories became a sentence of condemnation. The tears that flowed were not only of regret, but also of helplessness. He, who had always believed he controlled destinies, discovered that there were limits to his power. He could rebuild companies, buy alliances, restore his public reputation, but he could never mend the heart he had so cruelly shattered. The irony was brutal. His life had been saved by the very person he had destroyed, and yet this same woman had chosen to leave him behind. Soo-jin's shadow no longer brought him comfort. On the contrary, each time she tried to get closer, her presence became more suffocating, reminding him that he had traded true love for an emptiness disguised as passion. Deep down, Ji-hoon knew that even surrounded by riches, nothing could fill the space Hyrim had left. Lying in bed, staring at the white ceiling, he had the bitter certainty that he had lost not only a wife, but his only chance at redemption. And although the silence enveloped him, there was something that still terrified him. The feeling that Hyrim's final departure was only the beginning of his deepest ruin. The morning in Seoul dawned gray, as if the sky reflected the serenity and heaviness that had mingled last night. Lee Hyrim walked through the hospital doors with firm steps, each movement carrying the firmness of someone who had silently and irrevocably decided to leave the past behind. The cool city wind touched her face like a subtle invitation to freedom, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the burden she carried begin to dissipate. A single tear slipped from the corner of her eye, but there was no sadness in it. There was the softness of someone who allowed herself to feel, and at the same time, the strength of someone who decided to no longer be bound by what she had been. The slight smile that appeared on Hyrim's lips was discreet, almost imperceptible, but it carried a silent power, the feeling of finally freeing herself from the chains that bound her to suffering, those invisible bonds of hurt, disappointment, and loss that had weighed on her heart for so long. Behind her, the hospital stood as witness to a story that had reached its finale. Within those walls, Hyrim had not only saved a life, but also sealed her own transformation. Every corridor, every room, every silent object carried echoes of what had happened within. Stifled screams, silent tears, difficult decisions, and moments of courage that could never be recounted in simple words. There were no victory speeches, no exalted glances, only the deep, powerful silence of those who decide to move forward without looking back. The past remained there, inside the room, next to the man who, too late, had learned that arrogance and contempt do not sustain love, that no manipulation can hold back those who have learned to value their own essence. As she walked along the sidewalk, wet from the previous night's rain, Hirim felt the city slowly awaken. Cars hurried past, people rushed to their appointments, the sound of footsteps and horns mingling with the wind. To anyone passing by, she would be just another figure on the busy street, but for Hirim, every detail of the morning held meaning. The city's indifference, which to others might seem cold, was a gift to her. It meant freedom, freedom to simply be herself, without titles, without labels, without losing herself in the shadow of someone who no longer deserved her. Every breath was hers, every movement, her decision, every thought, her own conquered territory. The feeling of autonomy, of control over her own life, filled the void left by the pain and transformed the scar into a reminder of resistance and learning. In Jihun's heart, only emptiness remained, a silent, cold space that no one could fill. And, ironically, this emptiness would be the most enduring reminder of his existence. Some lives can be saved, some decisions corrected, but not all can be regained, nor all mistakes made right. The knowledge of loss, of what was irreversibly left behind, weighed on him like a constant echo of regret and frustration. And while Hirim moved forward with her own choices, the man who failed to appreciate what he had remained in the same place, a shadow of what could have been, a reminder that pain and neglect have consequences that extend far beyond any possible reconciliation. And so, the story ended. Not with applause, reconciliation, or external rewards, but with the quiet strength of a woman who knew how to transform pain into freedom, suffering into learning, and fear into courage. Every step she took was a testament to her own determination. And the conscious choice not to let the past define her future. Every breath was hers, no longer that of those who had tried to hold her back. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now. Here you'll find thrilling, intense, and twist-filled narratives designed to captivate you until the very last second. Don't forget to like, share, and activate the bell, because the next story will surprise you even more, delving into transformed lives, revealed secrets, and unexpected courage.